Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about the JJK games because Chris Clash came out last week and a lot of people were disappointed by it. Apparently, it was the first game to get the highest number of refunds within the first 48 hours, over 100K worth. This honestly shows the state of anime games right now. There are always the exceptions, like Dragon Ball Fighters was typically a lot of these anime games are really safe, and I think like you want to play up to how the game is made, and that's where we're going with this. Is how I would create a JJK game, assuming I had the ability to code or anything. And if anyone ever wants to make this game in their free time, feel free to reach out to me, and I can go into more detail on like some of the mechanic stuff that I will explain later in the video. But if you're just curious on like how I think a JJK game could work, then stick around. And this kind of applies for all anime games. So if you're not specifically into JJK and just any anime, then stick around. So first, we're going to talk about the story. And the problem with game stories are a lot of the time they are retellings of just a certain point in the anime, which sure it's a little fun to play through, but you don't get to experience anything new. It typically the game will never be as good as the anime version of it. So it's just kind of there, and you're like, I'll get it out of the way, and I'm really just getting the game to play against my friends online. So these games never really do anything. They never add to the world. They are worse versions of the anime. They're really short. Like Burning Blood was just Marineford. Demon Slayer was the first season. You can add DLC that got like up to the Mugen Train arc, I believe. Even Xenoverse, which is somewhat unique because it has a story within it. It's pretty much just retelling all of original Dragon Ball. And there are some games that escape this to some extent that while still doing it, like Dragon Ball Z Kakarot was a game that was able to do this well enough, but that was because that was the focus point. Like you were watching Goku's journey, and that was what the story was meant to be about, on top of the fact that it was open world and the story was kind of secondary in those aspects. But a lot of the time they aren't. So this is what I would think would be a good idea for a JJK game story plot. And obviously it's not canon, but anyways, so at the end of season 2, this will have spoilers, I guess, if just putting that out there right now for anyone who doesn't want to be spoiled for anything regarding the next season. So if you do, just wait, come back later whenever the season's out. But if not, I guess stick around. So Kenjaku, or the person controlling Geto's body, if you didn't get the official name in the season yet, used ideal transfiguration to turn all the cursed objects and the sorcerers who weren't knowledgeable about being sorcerers into being sorcerers, and the cursed objects were inhabited with sorcerers of the past in order to take over the body of the people who had them within. And overall, just creates the Culling Games arc that you get a bunch of old sorcerers fighting some of our main cast, and a bunch of stuff happens. So, for sake of argument, let's just say the first sorcerer ever also turned himself into a cursed object. And Kenjaku, who's only over 1,000 years old, while this guy's over, say, 5,000 years old, wasn't aware of it. And someone else found it, and they ultimately transfigure into this first sorcerer who has his own plot. And while everyone else, like the Yujis, the Yutas, the Megamis, are all dealing with the original plot line of saving the Culling Games people, this sorcerer is coming around, and he's trying to deal with his own plan, which, let's just say, it's similar to what Geto's was, where it's a strong world. Like, he doesn't care if you're a cursed spirit, cursed object, or if you're a sorcerer. Just if you're strong, you can survive. It's like he has a threshold for that. So, anyways, you're playing as a character who's fictional, where I'm just saying he's the second in command of the Gojo clan, because we don't get to see much from the other clans outside of the Zenin clan when Maki just defeats them all. because Gojo is the only Gojo clan member that's canon to the story. And I just named him like Gojo Saito. I gave him even some backstory where he's a blinded sorcerer where he had the six eyes, and he's like in his 40s now, to clarify that, because if you didn't read the manga yet, only Tengen says only one person can have the six eyes at a time, and that's why he wanted to seal Gojo, because Kenjaku's been defeated by six eyes users 2 times in the past. So you could say he's the six eyes user that was attached to Yuki, who was the Star Platinum vessel before Rika Amurai was. So you could then say he lets Yuki go, and in the end, because of that, they take the eyes of his and destroy them. His technique's at that point dead. He no longer has eyes, but before that, he makes a binding vow with himself to become super sensitive to cursed energy and presences, which is why he's able to sense this other sorcerer doing stuff despite all the craziness of the Culling Games. And he will then team up with the characters that we don't really see much in the Culling Games arc. Obviously, they move around a little bit for their own stories. Like, Todo hasn't appeared since Shibuya, so you could say he's with him. I said he gets a bionic arm now so that he can still use his technique. Because I believe it seems like he can... We see against Mahito is what I'm trying to say. I'm sorry about that. That he can clap someone else's hand against his and activate Boogie Woogie. So it doesn't have to be like his soul touching another part of his soul, which are both hands, in order to activate it. It just seems like it has to be a hand. So if he has a cursed tool bionic arm that is considered a hand, I think the technique can still work. And even if it doesn't, it's just a cool design, and it's not canon to the story anyways. Inomaki's barely in the Culling Games arc. He is shown when they try to deal with the higher-ups later, and Mei doesn't really join until the Shinjuku Showdown, where she's just live streaming it with her crows. So you can have these characters. Like I said, it's fictional. You can move it around a little bit if you really want some of the characters who aren't just super prevalent in the focus of the story. You can just push them on their side. You can move some characters like Reggie Star after he loses to Megami. I believe he's still alive. Can just join up with this character who's a first sorcerer who I haven't figured out a name for yet. And there. It builds the world. It creates an interesting plot within the developments of the world itself, and you get to play as your own character. I can say there's a little character creation, like you can pick hairstyles, body type, I suppose. But like generally, most of it's set in stone. Even if you wanted to change Saito, you'd be like Gojo, whatever name you want to put in the second half, because he has to be a member of the Gojo clan for this to kind of apply. But this is just an interesting story idea that I feel like could be expanded upon, and make someone, when they're playing the game, not know what's going to happen or deal with multiple problems. Like, I can see this sorcerer having like 2 techniques or whatever, and one of them allows him to stop reincarnation. He can bring back the disaster curses as his subordinates. You can even have the whole first sorcerer versus Jogo fight, because Gojo and Sukuna both got to defeat Jogo really easily, and you can just have this guy do it too, and then Jogo ultimately will join him later. But these are just like some ideas that I feel like would be cool to work out. So now we're going into the game mechanics of how I think the game would work. And kind of in this same vein, just a lot of these anime games don't take that much risk. They're all, as people call, storm clones. There are some variations, like naturally you have to store up a breathing technique, and there are some that take chances. Like, I like Burning Blood, but it gets repetitive. I like that it took the chances of being able to, if you're a Logia, have Logia guard for a little bit, so attacks pass through you if you don't have Haki on, or you're not guard breaking them. And Cursed Clash did some stuff too, where it's like you can't take damage unless it's attacked with a cursed technique on it, which I thought kind of a little dumb. But like, they took chances to kind of make it more of an homage to their own game. And that's kind of where I see this as a landscape of, they're all really similar, but you want to make them different enough where they can be competitive, hypothetically, against other games, and you can maybe play this like you could have fighters. Obviously, I like the 3D arena fighter concept because it gives you more space to do stuff. And I know Fighters is probably the best anime game out there, but I feel like there's so much more you can do with a 3D arena fighter, at least with the range of your attacks and stuff and freedom, that this game will be 3D arena fighter rather than just a 2D game like Fighters is. But anyways, so the problem with anime games, like I was saying earlier, just this is specifically focused on Curse Clash, is first, it's slow. It takes a while to dodge. You attack, there are attacks that do nothing. There's a long recovery time. It's solely built for 2v2, so you can't even really play 1v1 that well. So that's another thing that a lot of people like. I like that it has a 2v2 aspect as a focus, but you have to be able to play 1v1 as well. It doesn't incentivize you to master players because there is such a severe power gap between characters. Like Gojo and Sukuna are both really powerful. All of Sukuna's moves, I believe, is super armor, and Gojo has his limitless shield, as well as if you get either of their domains off, it just deals so much damage. On top of like the ultimates don't even look that good, just in general, because you look at some of the Storm ultimates, and those are just really impressive cutscenes, while these are just like Yuji's his barrage of black flashes, which is okay. I personally don't like over like the top animations that much because it does take away from the game because you can't really do anything while the animation's happening. I did put a few in here for some characters because I feel like you have to balance characters who have domains with those who don't. But that's kind of where my thoughts are, and as well as just it's hard to really make combos out of it. Like a lot of these combos fall flat and you can't really extend or play out of the way that it's built to be played, making the game kind of more boring and repetitive. So, moving on to the game mechanics of this game, is just that, first off, cursed energy. I feel like it's the key to anything. All these characters have cursed energy, and there's a meter with 100 points. Just imagine like a straight up meter that's at 100. And you start the match at 100%, which I know you could say might make people spam, except for the fact that I made it where there's cooldown on all your cursed technique moves, so you can't just spam them because you have 100% of your meter at the beginning. Some of your moves take a lot, like if you open a domain that takes 30% or 30 cursed energy points on your meter, and you only get +1 cursed energy back every second. And the only other ways to get it is through black flashes, where I even gave the black flashes their own homage to the show and manga, because if you hit your first black flash, your meter maximum increases from 100 to 120, and then you get +20, but then after that you'll get +5 cursed energy for every black flash. And I'll get into like the mechanics of black flashes later, but that's just how that's going to work out. So you are like drawing out 120% of your potential when you hit your first black flash, and then every black flash after that gives you back cursed energy. So you have to play more sparingly with some of these effects, and that's what's cool about it. And also, Toji and Heavenly Restriction Maki won't have a cursed energy meter because they don't have cursed energy. They'll have their own gimmick, where I kind of explained it vaguely when we get to the character roster, but like both of them are slightly different as well, which we'll talk about later. So into black flashes, which I mentioned in the previous one, is outside of just the normal 1% regen you get, how you're going to regain your cursed energy most of the time. And first off, their guard breaks. You can also break guard without a black flash, but like they just have that effect built into them, where it's like this. And to land a black flash, there's two ways. First one is you have to land a perfectly uninterrupted combo, which let's just say that's 15 hits, where if you do that, you get one black flash. Like there's a little box at the bottom of your screen, and you can like store them up. The other way is with RNG, where it's just you're hitting a combo and maybe you'll have a black flash in there because, once again, the way it's shown in the anime and the manga is nobody can control when they're going to hit a black flash. Like, they can try to bring one out, and it's definitely more likely that they would if they are, hence the combos. But there's also just, like, part of it's not in that regard. So I made it fully based on luck for the second way. So you could have a skill way and a luck way for it, where I set it up where characters with domain expansions, because they have some advantage naturally, will have a 1 in 100 chance of a hit becoming a black flash, while characters without domains would have 1 in 60. And because Yuji just can hit black flashes so frequently, even though he's not technically able to do it on his own, like, at will, I put his at 1 in 40. Because also Yuji just doesn't have that much technique stuff we know about even in the manga now. It's something related to the soul. You might be able to switch bodies with people or sever people's connection between their soul and their body. It could be dealt with later, and actually, if someone ever made this game, it would take a while regardless. So, on that note, that's just how it will work. And similarly, if you try to guard break while you have a black flash stored, it's just going to activate the black flash instead. It does 5 times the damage of a normal hit. So I know in the anime it's 2.5 times, but it's like a normal hit, and it realistically would push you back. So it would cancel out some combos. So you just have to kind of reward the fact that it does this. And it can even be used mid-combo, like you're hitting someone, but naturally it will push them back and end your combo. And that's just kind of where I think black flashes are a cool mechanic that could be in the game, that like anybody can use, obviously excluding Toji and Maki, who have their own gimmicks later on. Now we have Binding Vows, which, as people know, you can sacrifice something in the game, in JJK, in order to get more power or increase an effect. Most notable example, I guess, that I could think of from the manga is the Gojo Sukuna fight, where if you're touching Gojo, Infinite Void doesn't affect you. So when Gojo and Sukuna were having the domain clash, Sukuna made a binding vow to ignore his guaranteed hit within the barrier in order to increase the strength of it outside the barrier, because his domain had a larger radius than Gojo's, and then he was just touching Gojo at the same time, so he got the effect off and was able to destroy Gojo's barrier easier. So in the game, you can essentially seal off one of your cursed techniques at the cost of giving yourself an advantage in the rest of the fight. And this can only be done once per game, and you have to set it prior to the match, because if you have a list of 5 options, it's going to be tough to pick mid-match, because the way it's going to just have to work on the controller. If you can do it during the match, I feel like all the better to you. It gives you more options. You can pick the one that you need for the scenario, but I just think realistically it would be easier to set it before matches. You can set it per character too. If I'm using a character who has a domain, I might want to use the one that gives you a domain meter. Or if I'm not, then I'm realistically never going to pick that one. Overall, though, essentially you seal one of your techniques. For instance, let's say you're Hanami and you have the Cursed Buds attack. That attack will be gone for the rest of the match. In exchange, you get one of the effects. So one being plus 25 cursed energy, another one being plus 10 cursed energy, and plus 15% to your domain meter. I'll explain the domain meter later. Plus 15% to health, doubling the recovery speed of cursed energy for the rest of the match. And the 5th one is just automatically get a black flash. And you could hypothetically seal a move that you feel like is useless at the beginning, and you have that black flash automatically tuned in to get you up to 120 cursed energy. So there are ways to use this both mid-match, early in match. I feel like it gives you more strategic play with how you're playing a character, how you're playing against other characters. Because you might be like, oh, I know how OP this domain is. I want to clash against their domain and make sure I win, so I'm going to pick the domain meter one. Or I know I want to be aggressive in the beginning, so I'll store a black flash at the beginning, because you can't go over the 100% meter for your curse. So even if you pick the plus 25 and you're at, say, 85, you'd be at 100 still. Or if you had the Black Flash and you were at 100, you'd only be at 120. You wouldn't be at 125 because you got the plus 25 cursed energy. Wow, so that's just kind of another cool mechanic that I'm throwing in. Then finally, the other mechanic before we get into the stuff that I did a lot of work thinking about in domains is guarding. So you can guard against attacks. The longer you guard, the easier it is to break. And just in that same vein, if you're like guarding for like a whole minute, you can break the attack even if there's not a guard, break move, or a black flash incorporated, because it's just going to get weaker over time. And then there's counters, which allows you to counter opponents' melee attacks by hitting the same input as they do. And this is to prevent your opponent from just getting so many black flashes from just landing uninterrupted combos, because the longer a combo goes on, the higher chance of you countering. And a counter deals a little bit of damage, but then pushes them back, so it resets the battle, and they naturally won't get their combo off. And the way you hit a counter is kind of like in Xenoverse when you clash. You just press the same button as they do at the same time. Like you're both pressing X on a Xbox controller, and then the longer it is, the longer amount of time you have to press X if they're also pressing X. So it's not like so you need to know other people's combos and like prepare that way to get good counters off and prevent them from storing black flashes, which would give them big advantage in the games. So, sorry, I forgot this one too. So reverse curse techniques, this counts as one of the moves. You have like I'm gonna keep preferencing Xenoverse, but it's when you have the RT on the Xbox and the LT. The LT shows your ults and your RT shows your supers. Those are just going to be kind of combined, where RTA is always going to be the domain expansion for anyone with domains. And just generally, that's how that's going to work. Anyway, so RCT would be one of the moves in those two. And anyone with RCT can use it 3 times a match. It does cost cursed energy from your meter. It's limited to 3 times, so like anyone with RCT can't just perpetually stay alive forever. And it does vary per person. If you're Yuta, Gojo, or Sukuna, you get the 8%, Cursed Spirits get 7%, and all other RCT users get 6%. And just because their just mastery over it is better, kind of shows a little more of an homage to how the game works. Tell you how the manga is. And I could see totally we can nerf them all down to just 7% or 6% if we think that Gojo and Sukuna just get such a severe advantage from this being the case of getting an extra hypothetical 6% health per match. And yeah, okay. I keep forgetting this too. So, like I said, domains give a big advantage to anyone with a domain. So to balance this out, we're going to have like a melee strength setting for all of the characters. So imagine just anyone with a domain, they're attacking. Their attacks will deal 1.0 damage to your opponent, in the sense where that's what their strength is. If Gojo hits, if Hanami hits, if Jogo hits someone, let's say it deals 2 damage. Then if someone without a domain attacks, which is 1.5, they do 3 damage. Or someone with a simple domain attacks, they get they'll deal like 2.7, and Toji and Maki will deal closer to 4 damage per every melee hit. So it's a way to balance them out, because even with just domain amplification activated, which I'll go into that later too, they're up to 1.6 on their melee attacks, so they're stronger than those without domains, but it does come at a cost and makes it harder for them to use their domains. So it evens it out where characters without domains, simple domains, Toji and Maki, will typically always be stronger, except for when the opponent has their domain active, or if they're using domain amplification. But like baseline-wise, they're stronger to balance out for it. And like I said, I could see myself, or if someone else, making ultimates for everyone without a domain to balance that out as well. But we gotta play it by ear, and this, I feel like, just is the easiest way to balance it out. As you can see, I made Maharaga its own character. I'll get into that later as well. So now we're finally into domains, which, let's be honest, it's everybody's favorite part about JJK. And I know, a lot of words on the screen right now. But, so you have a domain meter, and this is how it's going to work. The domain meter fills up from the match. Unlike Cursed Energy, it starts at 0 just so that opponents can't just open their domain immediately and give themselves the advantage that cancels out what the melee strength distribution was meant to do. Whenever they hit a black flash on their opponent, they get plus 5% to their domain meter, and then every time they lose a percent of health or their opponent loses 2% of health, they get plus 1 to their domain meter, as well as if you're in your opponent's domain, you also get 1% of your domain meter increased every second you're in there. Kind of to be like, just because your opponent activated their domain doesn't mean you'd lose out on yours. And you can use it later. So, quite frankly, this is how the meter will work. And then over here, you can see for Gojo and Sukuna, who have way more powerful domains, which I literally made a slide for every domain to explain how it will work. Theirs are slower. They'll need to lose 2% of health or deal 4% of health to their opponent to build up their bar. So realistically, it's harder for them to get their domain off first because of how broken they are. But if they do get to it, they can deal some damage to you, and then essentially neither player has a domain anymore while it's happening. So the way you can activate your domain is you have to have your bar at least 90%. And it costs 30 cursed energy, so hypothetically that would be 30% if you didn't have a black flash, or if you did, 25% of your total cursed energy, so you have to be conservative. And it costs 10% of your domain meter, because as your domains open or as you're using domain amplification, that will slowly dwindle as well. And if you're at 51% or more, you can then clash with your opponent if they're activating their domain. And that's just to kind of like Tenkaichi has their blast clashes. This is meant to be that same way where you have a chance to open your domain if your opponent tries to activate it first. And I put this other thing in there as a preference. I could see if someone's like, this is a bad idea, and if it does, we could change that. But in online matches, I feel like it would be cool if your opponent can't see your domain meter, because whoever has the higher domain meter during the clash will have an advantage, which I'll get into during the how domain clashes will work. So by having that, it makes your opponent maybe hesitate on when they want to use their domain or not. Just generally my thoughts on that. Like I said, if this video gets a lot of views and people want me to go more in depth on how I imagine some of this stuff works, then let me know. I'd totally be happy to do that. Anyway, so domain clashes. So like I said, if your opponent activates their domain and you have at least that 51% of your domain bar, you can clash with them. So when your opponent activates their domain, if you have a simple domain, if you have domain amplification, if you have your own domain, it will give you like that gray screen that gives you the option where say X is clash, Y is simple domain, B is use domain amplification, or anything of that sort, in order to, and if you don't do anything for like 2 seconds, your opponent's just domain animation triggers and you're in their domain now. So, but if you do clash, then the person with the higher domain meter at the start, so let's say you start the domain, you have 91%, and the other character, let's just say it's Jogo, their domain meter is at 96%. Then they get in the tug of war of domain, so to speak. You have to like spam pressing A to win the clash, kind of like how you used to have to do that during beam clashes for Tenkaichi. And if you have the higher amount of domain meter at the start of the clash, you already start 7% ahead, like in percent of how many A's you'd have to press to win the domain clash. And then you get an additional 3% for every 5% higher than your opponent you are. So while you're speaking, in the first one, to get it to reach that certain point, or the 100% that the 7%, 3% are referring to, wins the domain clash. But there are consequences if you fail the domain clash. First off, you can't use any of your techniques, your simple domain, or your domain amplification for 15 seconds, because this is meant to emulate the technique burnout that happens when your domain closes, as well as, regardless of how long the match continues for, you can't expand your domain again. Obviously, there are a few exceptions, with that being Hikari and Higuruma's, because their domains are active a lot differently. But like outside of Gojo and Sukuna, character-wise, most people can't activate a domain more than once in a day. So for that reason, this includes Gojo and Sukuna though, that you just can't use your domain. But there is a few benefits to it. The first one is that even if you clash, your opponent will lose an extra 10% of their domain meter regardless. So it costs 10% to open it, but if you clash, it will cost 20% to open it for the winner. So their domain will last shorter amounts of time, even if at the cost of your domain. But also, that's why, as I said in the domain meter thing, you get plus 1% to your domain meter every second you're in your opponent's domain. So you can hypothetically wait and you can clash with them later while you're in their domain, but you can't do it for 15 seconds, so your opponent at least gets their domain effect for a little bit, as like the cost for you not clashing immediately. And that realistically, I feel like would be the way people would go, where they had a simple domain, they get a little bit of a power boost, as I'll explain when I talk about simple domains, and then wait for their opponent to slowly weaken their domain before you then clash and take over. Once again, even in that case, you'd lose an extra 10% for clashing. So I don't know exactly how it will play out. It's strategic. I'd imagine most people's domain meters would be similar. So if someone's at 87% and the other person's like 92, I can see those clashes happening a lot more at the beginning, because you don't want to deal with your opponent's domain effect immediately. But we'll have to play it by ear. Anyway, so domain amplification, once your domain meter reaches 25% or more, you can use it, where it costs 1% of your domain meter per second it's activated. And its general effect is it just gives you plus 60% to melee attack. So like I was saying earlier, how the melee attack distribution works, just by activating domain amplification, your melee attacks will now be stronger than those without domains, and everyone excluding Maharaga, Toji, and Maki. It can also be used in your opponent's domain. It can't be used in your own, because you can't double stack to get up to like 260% on your melee attacks. So keep that in mind. And I know in the manga, you can't use a domain amplification at the same time as you use your technique. So, however, in this, it's fine. Like it only gives a boost to melee attacks, so it doesn't really affect your curse technique. And realistically, you're not using both at the same time. So you can use both, just leaving that out there. Anyway, simple domains. Some characters that have domains will have this, such as Todo, if Kusakabe is ever in the game, Miwa, etc. And it's just can only be activated in your opponent's domain. It gives you just the 20% melee stat boost, but this does not drain your domain meter at all. So if you're a character with a simple domain but no domain, you're at least at the 1.6 on the strength distribution compared to your opponent. So it gives you that boost there for being in there. And I know some domains will have additional effects, and if anyone talks about this or actually wants to make this game with me, we can talk about hypothetically removing some of the effects or weakening them for if you have a simple domain active. But just generally, this would be the baseline, because some domains just have different effects. So now we're into domain expansions, and there's a lot of them, which I know a lot of people will like. So the first one is Gojo's Infinite Void. And I know people don't love Curse Clash, but I kind of felt like how they did the domain does work out a little bit. So first off is his melee strength gets 5 times stronger while his domain's open, and his opponent is frozen within Infinite Void. They can't clash while in Infinite Void, but also Infinite Void would never stay open for that 15-second period where you could clash, but you can clash before it starts. Opponent's frozen, all your techniques are sealed, and you just hit them with melee attacks. And because of that, its drain is so much faster, where outside than the 10% that you lose for opening it, and then hypothetically another 10% if your opponent clashes and you win, if you're at 90% at the start of that, then you're at 7%. Then you get 7 seconds within your domain, and then after that you get the domain cooldown. But the bright side is you just deal a lot of damage when you're at that 500%. As simple as it goes, it's pretty much unavoidable. You get teleported right in front of your opponent, so you don't waste a second running towards them. And that's just how Gojo's domain would work in the game. I'm open to other ideas on this because of how broken Infinite Void is. I mean, even Sukuna uses Maharaga first just to deal with Infinite Void and get rid of it before he starts trying to deal with Limitless. So, as a whole, because he knows if he just is caught lacking against Infinite Void, he'll lose. Anyways, talking about Sukuna, we have Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine. First off, unlike Gojo's here, it only takes 7% per every second it's open. And it just constantly cuts your opponent, which blocks their screen, kind of like a Mario Kart ink thing. It just constantly blocks your vision of it. But what makes this domain unique is that you're actually able to escape the domain before the domain collapses. Because his doesn't have an opening. His doesn't have a barrier around it. If you're far away from Sukuna when he opens his domain, because it has such a large range, you can hypothetically escape it while the damage is being dealt. But to balance it out a little bit, your speed is lower. You get a speed debuff by 40%, so it's harder to escape if you're close to Sukuna. Sukuna is also slower in this area just because you're constantly getting dealt damage anyways, and we don't want it to be like stackable that way. But if he does get close to you, he's able to deal you damage more, and you're still distracted, and you can fight in there. But I feel like the option to escape this domain, just as a gimmick for it, will give it some uniqueness that makes it different than all the other domains. Next, we got Jogo's Coffin of the Iron Mountain. And these 4 disaster curses will be generally similar in the same overall effect. This is like the baseline effect, where that Sukuna and Gojo don't have. But it's just, your melee strength becomes 200. So now you're stronger than Maharaga, Toji, and Maki within there. As well as your curse techniques cost are halved. Jogo, because of just the intense heat of the volcanic mountain domain, deals 1% damage to your opponent's health every second they're in it. So if you don't clash immediately, you're pretty much guaranteed to lose 15%. And then it takes away only 2% of your domain meter every second. But every time you use one of your curse techniques that have half cost and half cooldown, it takes another 5%. So at least it still prevents spamming to some extent, because if you spam, your domain meter slows. And if you want to make it slightly more unique, you could say maybe Jogo is a character who sets traps, like his volcanoes. Well, but when in the domain, those traps, instead of just setting them randomly, and then if your opponent comes across them, it's set up under your opponent. Your opponent can still dodge out of it, but it makes it more annoying for them. That's just another idea for him. But yeah, simply that's what it's going to look like. So Mahito's Self-Embodiment of Perfection has the same first effect, 2 effects, cost and everything down. But it's tough to give him it because Ideal Transfiguration is so OP. So the first major effect he has is whenever he causes you damage, he takes away some of your cursed meter. Like how Nanami get hit with Ideal Transfiguration, but he protected his soul enough that he didn't auto-lose. However, then, if your opponent hits you, if your opponent has less than 5% of their cursed energy while in the domain, and you hit them, they auto-lose. And because this domain hasn't that auto-win condition, realistically, your opponent will be more scarce on losing their cursed energy. And it does take a while. It becomes 4% every second that the domain meter lowers, as well as losing the normal 5% every time you use a curse technique. So, and it's not like for every percent of damage they lose 3 cursed energy. It's every time they get damage. So if you melee combo them, all those hits would count. But if you hit them with like a massive curse technique move, for instance, like he summons the polymer guys and then hits you, with one of those, that would just count as like one hit just by doing more damage than each individual hit. Honestly, because it has the auto win condition, I can see that being moved up to 5% domain meter every second, but we'll kind of play that by ear. Next off, we have Dagon's Horizon of the Captivating Skanda. First off, that's the two main effects, but also to make him unique, he gets an ultimate while his domain's open. So while some of the characters without domains will have ultimates, this would be a domain that has an ultimate within it. And I think it should be the one he does on Toji, where he wraps Toji up in like an eel and then get piranhas all around him, and then like the giant sea monster one from episode 15 of season 2. And because he has the ultimate, but it is avoidable, but nothing like extra special like Mahito's, it's just a 2% again, drain for every second, as well as 5% every time a curse technique is used. Which I didn't go into detail on curse techniques for all the characters because I know how tough that can be to describe, as well as like more detailed it is. Like I said, if people really find this video interesting, I'd be happy to go more in detail on that. I do have some ideas for some of the characters like Hanami, who is next, and Gojo, and Todo, and others. So I know we don't get to see Hanami's domain in the manga or the anime, but it's admitted that they have one. They use domain amplification. They're about to use it in their fight against Todo and Yuji, and also officially got a name from Gege, which is Shining Sea of Flowers, which I believe is like Dai Kohai in Japanese. And its main effect, because what it seemed like it was its can't miss attack was its Flower Blast. That right up here. And because we can't really give guaranteed hit attacks because that would just make it too OP, I'm going to make it kind of have some tracking effect while the domain's open. So similar to like a bending Kamehameha or the SS Deadly Bomber from Xenoverse, how they track you if you avoid it the first time. You can still guard against it. So there are ways around it, but it makes it more annoying to deal with. And just simply, it's 3% because the tracking is annoying, and if the curse technique cost and cost cooldown times are less, they can effectively use it more. So it does have a cost here where it does take 10% of your domain meter just to use that Flower Blast technique every time you use it, compared to using a normal technique, which these are separate. So if you use the Flower Blast, you don't lose 13%. But you can typically use it multiple times while the domain's open. And for this, I imagine like the domain would look like the flower field that Hanami uses, and then like a wooden ball just surrounding it. But that's just ideas. Like, we'd still have to go through it later. So, moving on, we got Megumi's Chimera Shadow Garden, which is an incomplete domain. So, first off, it does the same cost as Jogo's, and the same two major effects. First off, he has the opponent's speed debuff of -20, which is less than Sukuna's, because all of the Shikigami are kind of surrounding their legs. But the main thing is it doesn't have a bigger effect because it's an incomplete domain, where it can only be activated within a domain clash or on an indoor stage. So that just kind of adds to its gimmick. But because it has a domain clash effect, it can still be activated whenever your opponent activates theirs. And to balance it out, because of that limitation, as well as it being the weakest domain by effect, as I explained, domain clashes, if your opponent has higher meter than you, they get a 7% advantage on the clash, and then additional 3% for every 5% that they're ahead in domain meter. For Megumi, that doesn't apply. So if Megumi has 50% of his domain meter while his opponent has 90%, they both have started 0. They start even because of this disadvantage that Megumi's has. And it makes you, if you're a Megumi player, able to, if you're just faster than your opponent, always start an even keel in a domain. So that's where I was thinking with that. Anyways, we're moving on to the two super unique domains, I think, which are Hikari's Restless Gambler and Higuruma's Deadly Sentence. So for Hikari's, So these two, first off, can use their domain multiple times in the match, and that's just because of what their effects are. They don't give the same advantage. So first off, the main thing to look at is they can use their domain once their domain meter reaches 30%, rather than reaching 90%. They also lose an extra 5% of their domain meter as a cost for activation. But this domain will stay open until his jackpot is hit, or if someone else opens their domain, which they can't clash against it on activation, but if they're at 90% of their meter, they can activate their domain and overtake it at that point. So that's to be noted. And the effect of his domain would still trigger, which is just the lottery pull, because it's pretty much just a stage change to the pachinko lottery that it is. And then whenever he hits a jackpot, his domain will close. He gets health and cursed energy regen for 15 seconds, where he gets a +2 cursed energy regen and +1 health regen per second. So for the cursed energy, that's actually going to be +3 cursed energy per second. So it pretty much overtakes the cost of it, where it costs 30 cursed energy to activate the domain. You'd get 45 back in that second period, or just 30% 30 back if you ignore the normal regen that comes. So he covers himself. He can't activate his domain for the next 15 seconds realistically while it's active. And he can just hypothetically keep spamming it. And if the opponent overtakes his domain, the lottery thing that will be on the bottom of the screen that happens every 5 seconds will stay there. Because his main ability is his domain, and we really haven't seen him clash domains. If he fights Urume right now in the manga and he does clash his domain, this could change. And your opponent can actually, and then his pachinko's just gone. But that's how that's going to work. Then we have Hikaruma's Deadly Sentence. And it's the only domain out there that actually will have an outside effect on Toji when I get to Toji at a certain instance. But its effect, you can do this one of two ways. I made it the simple way, but if a lot of people want to work on this game, hypothetically with me, obviously we don't have the rights to it, so it would be kind of a passion project. I'd be fine making this like an Ace Attorney mini game within the game, where you have 5 prompts, the opponent, and then you have a 50-50 odd of them having the evidence. If you do, then you get to pick the move that you confiscate. But the way it works here is just when it opens the animation, then 2 dice roll. Then if they get a 1 or a 12, they're innocent, so nothing happens. If they get a 2 through 8, you seal one of your opponent's curse techniques, just for the rest of the match. And then if they get a 9 or 10, they're innocent most of the time, but if their health is under 20%, then you get the Executioner's Sword as one of your curse techniques, which just would be go to an available slot that wasn't being used before, and counts as a move. Doesn't take much cursed energy or have a cooldown, but it is slow and your opponent can guard or avoid it, and just an auto win if it hits. But then if you get an 11, you seal their domain for the rest of the duel, so they can't use their domain expansion regardless of circumstance or what have you. However, because sometimes you get an innocent, there's a retrial attempt where it would still take the normal cost that he would have for his domain expansion, which he needs to reach 30% of his bar and do this. But he can then be like, I didn't like the move I took. Let's just say he's fighting Todo and it's the worst of his boogie woogie moves. He could retrial and potentially try to get something better, or he gets an innocent and he's like, I really want to take a move from this guy. However, retrial also would unseal the move that he originally sealed. So if he got a 8 and seal, say, the Cursed Buds of Hanami or the blue of Gojo, and then rolls an 11, then he seals Gojo's Infinite Void, but then blue is reactive, and that's just how that's going to work. And it's going to be interesting. Like I said, if enough people want to work on this fully as passion product, we can't sell it. We don't have the rights like Bandai Namco does. I mean, we could hypothetically sell it to Bandai Namco, but that's just how it's gonna be. I'd be happy to make this into an Ace Attorney minigame in the middle of the game, in the middle of the fights. I feel like it would be fun. It would make Higuruma a really interesting character. And just also on the same note, Higuruma's 11, which seals domains, will also seal an effect that Toji has, which I'll get to later. Just it's 11. It could be more. We can talk about this later. Just I think 11 would be good for it. And then the final domain, yes, it is the final domain, is Yuta's true love, which was revealed in chapter 249. So I'm sorry if you got spoiled for this domain. He uses it earlier than that in like chapter 180 something, but we don't actually get to see it. So he gets the first two effects as normal. But then the third effect, which is unique, is if any of you have played Smash, you know that Hero, when he uses down B, gives you a list of moves. And that changes every time you either use a move or you reopen the down B list. So that's what Yuta is going to be. Yuta normally, let's just say, he'll have a Kirby-like ability where whoever he's facing gets one of their moves randomly, and then his other three moves, he just pseudo-roulettes it and becomes three moves from a different character. Outside of that, then he'd have Domain, RCT, Rika's a move on his other page. So let's just say it's like that. But when he opens this, his Domain, it becomes like Hero's list. Every time he opens RT to check his moves, they'll change. There'll be even some moves from characters who won't be in the game, at least at launch, in my opinion, like Earth and Ice Missile, which we've seen Yuta now use 3 times, or Charles's Clairvoyance ability with his manga panels. So these are like 2 major abilities that I feel like will be in the game, just to even out for characters. And like everybody else, he has the normal -2, and then I put it -5, but because his Domain's main ability is that his moves change, I could see moving that down to -4% for every technique used, because he's just going to be using so many techniques. And there are limits, like you can't use this 10 Shadows technique because the Shikigami need to be bound through the ritual first. You can't use Gojo's technique because he doesn't have 6 eyes and Limitless at the same time. And there's going to be a few more exceptions. But we're talking he can use moves like Boogie Woogie. He can use, say, some of Hanami's moves, some of Jogo's moves. He's kind of going to be a jack of all trades in his Domain. And if you don't like his list, you just close it and then reopen it. It's a whole new list again, just randomized to 4. Also, for sake of argument, if anyone has ultimate moves, those are excluded from this list too. It would just be like first page list moves. Then Ice Missile would be Uro's realistic ultimate move, but it would be stronger if Uro became like a DLC character or later, or like a free edition, which is still DLC, but just in general. And this one would just be fun to play. And then once he closes his Domain, he still has the Curse Technique Burnout, but then his 3 moves that he got from just a random character, those reset too. So he gets another roulette there, assuming he doesn't finish them off in his Domain. So now we're onto the character roster. And here we go, just covering some of this. Yuji's first. I don't really know exactly where to go with Yuji on like some moves and whatnot, but like that's easy enough to figure out in my opinion. And so Yuji's just first. Next we have Megami, who has the Domain, as well as just gonna have some 10 Shadows moves. I can imagine his moves being like Nue and Demon Dog Totality just being 1 move. He won't have Maharaga because Maharaga will be its own character, but like another one being the Elephant, another one being just like a roulette between the other ones, like his final one being like the Bunny Escape, which is an evasive that can be used when someone else is attacking you, regardless of the attack. It does cost cursed energy still. And maybe make some of these, like you can leave them out. Some of them are just like full attacks, like the roulette one. You got the Raging Bull, that just does its 1 attack, which is like a straight dash that deals damage. But if you had the Demon Dogs or New Way Out, those just slowly lower your cursed energy meter, but they stay out for as long as you want them to. Gojo, it's tough to make Gojo, because the Limitless barrier is a mistake that Curse Clash did to make him too OP. But you can do something similar where you make it so that while he's having it active, it has an insane drain on cursed energy, which once again is harder to refill in this game compared to what Curse Clash would have, and make it like melee attacks still work on him. It's just that curse techniques don't. Like if you launch a meteor at him, but that won't work. Or Hanami launches tree vines. those won't. But if they're just attacking you up close, they would. Next up, we have Nanami. Once again, like Yuji, I feel like he'd have just higher odds at Black Flash. You maybe get the ratio attacks where whenever a ratio attack counts, it will count as multiple hits in a combo. So just makes it easier for him to store Black Flashes. He has his overtime binding vow that works on its own, where you can steal your cursed energy down to 90 or 80% beforehand. And then once you get down to like the last 30 seconds of the match, or if your health lowers below 20%, you get like plus 40 cursed energy, and your meter's maximum increases to 120. And then if you had a Black Flash, it would increase to 140. So he'd have the highest just sheer amount of cursed energy because he seals it for the majority of the match. But that's just some ideas. Like, we can totally work through this more, and I have some like more in-depth ideas on some characters. Some characters I just have like general concepts on. So Toto, a lot of boogie woogie moves. I can imagine he gets an ultimate that's an animation. You could pick it as either the one in his imagination or the one where he does the Black Flash and it counts as a Black Flash too, and he throws a rock and then literally switches place with it and gets the momentum and just increases speed like that, and just has that really cool animation from season 2 as his ult. But like I said, I'm going more in detail on some characters. Some characters I literally have specific stuff for that just clarify because of how they are. So Yuta, like I explained earlier, copy moves. He'll have Rika as a move, as Rika can stay out, but it drains your cursed energy. Generally the same way. So now we have Toji, which is a character that I have a little bit of description for. So as I said, him and Maki, that Heavenly Restriction Maki, which I don't have current original Maki in the game, could be a DLC character, completely fine with that, is as his health lowers, he gets access to different cursed tools. Like he can have the he can have his sword just automatically from the beginning, but then as he increases, it says once he gets to 15% of his health or lower, he gets the Inverted Spear of Heaven, which negates all curse techniques. So it seals all your opponent's moves, and it becomes a melee fight from that point on if you're using Toji. Regardless of what moves they have, the only thing they can activate is their domain or domain amplification, but they don't get any of the domain effects against Toji. In that same regard, Toji and Maki are immune to domain effects. So Mahito's ideal transfiguration of less than 5% cursed energy won't affect him. Nor will Jogo's minus 1% health, or Sukuna's speed debuff, or Megumi's speed debuff. He is still frozen in Infinite Void. This Infinite Void is just going to be unavoidable. But this way, you can at least boost your strength to 200% while the domain's active, but that's the only effect you'll get from it if Inverted Spear of Heaven's out. And like I said, to make Higuruma just more interesting, if he activates his domain, because he doesn't get the strength boost from it, if he rolls an 11, he seals Inverted Spear of Heaven, and then the fight resumes like a normal fight between the two of them, and he can still use his curse technique. But if he doesn't get an 11, it doesn't do anything. So now we have Maharaga, who also doesn't have much. First off, he has an auto healing move that like he slowly regens health. It's going to be slow enough that you can easily beat him, but enough that it annoys the opponent. As well as he also has he doesn't have any moves, but he's super effective against any of the cursed spirits, as well as any cursed technique that's used against him twice becomes ultimately useless after that. For the third time, so the first time it hits you, it will do 100% of the damage. But then the second time, it will do 50%. The third time, it will do 15% or 20%. And then if they try to use it a fourth time or more, it's completely negated. Same with domains, where if he's in a domain for more than 10 seconds, nothing happens. He also gets to be at strength of 1.7 just constantly. And it makes it more interesting of a character because he's just like a full melee character like the others. But he has healing. He's weaker than Toji or Maki without their special gimmicks. And he's similar to Toji with the Inverted Spear of Heaven. Slowly negates curse techniques and prevents spammers in the game. Next you have Jogo. A lot of heat-based moves. I said, like you can have a tracking trap in his domain. Like I said, if people really like this video, I'll make a second video talking about specific move sets I can imagine for characters. Or if people want to actually talk to me about this game. Stuff like that. Mahito, a lot of moves where he can manipulate human souls. I don't really love what they did with Mahito and Curse Clash, but I also had like this cool RNG thing that I have with him. I don't want too many characters of RNG because then I don't want them to all feel similar. Where he transforms how he looks, like he can hypothetically turn into like a centaur, and then he has like a 1 in 10% chance whenever he uses that move. Maybe 115, I don't know. We'll balance that out of turning into his true essence of his soul, which just gives him massive melee buff and slightly lowers the cost of all his curse techniques, and he could still use it in the domain, and like would, and for that form, it would be like if he's at, instead of his 100, he'd be at like 1.2, and he'd be then at 2.2 when his domain's active. We can figure this out. That's just some stuff I was thinking with him. Dagon, domain, Shikigami, water techniques. Hanami has like all the curse blood, bud, wood. We see a lot of different techniques that Hanami does have in the fight against Todo and Yuji, so a lot to play with there. Sukuna, you give the fire move, a lot of cleave, dismantle. Yuta will also be able to use cleave or dismantle, as we saw in 250. You can give him the world slash, but like honestly, this is Yuji Sukuna. So you can honestly, I can see DLC have Megami Sukuna, which I'd get into more, and he'd actually be able to use Maharaga to some extent, just as a really cool character gimmick. Like it would be a lot less effective than just using Maharaga outright, but he could have the wheel above his head, and every attack that he takes, like a curse technique, it would slowly lower. Like, well, Maharaga, if he takes a technique 4 times, it does nothing. Every time an attack hits him while he has the wheel out, which would be a drain on cursed energy, causes 10% less damage every additional time someone uses it. So they'd have to use it 10 times for it to do nothing, and if he takes the wheel off, it doesn't reset, but it would go back to 100 while the wheel's not active. Just some ideas. You'd have Agito. He is one of the DLC potential characters I listed. Hikari. Everyone loves Hikari. Restless Gambler. Higuruma. Some additional moves outside of his domain, but like these two, like their main focus would be domain moves. Hashimo is another character I gave like kind of extra uniqueness to. First off, he has his Mythic Beast Amber transformation, which, because it kills him in the process, it can't be unactivated, and its effect is it gives you plus 50 cursed energy, even if it goes over the maximum, and it minuses your health 1% every second that's active, and once it's done, like it's going to continuously drain you regardless. It also gives you a bit of a strength boost and a speed boost. Like typically he'll be slower than someone like Toji or Maki, but with it on, he'd be slightly faster, if not, or on par with them. As well as, to make him unique, despite not having a domain, he does have a guaranteed hit effect, where he actually keeps the guaranteed hit effect. So he stores every melee attack he does on you, deals electricity to you, and it slowly fills up his own electricity bar. And once fully active, assuming he's close enough range to them, it will hit them and potentially start combo. It doesn't do much damage, but it hits them automatically to stun them for a second. You can then get a combo off of it where they'd have to counter, guard, do something to ultimately avoid it. But it makes Kashimo like fun to play, where he's, despite all these characters with domains, he'll be the only one who has an attack that can't be dodged, assuming you're within the range of it. Chozo, you give him blood manipulation stuff, you give him the Echizo and Keiso stuff that like he uses against Kenjaku. Mei, because Mei would be one of the characters who would be a focus point in the game. Heavenly Restriction Maki, who, unlike Toji, she starts with the Soul Blade that she has because it's the Mai weapon. I don't see her changing. But unlike him, she could just get stronger as she gets dealt more damage. So while Toji switches cursed techniques, it's like cursed tools to get different effects, she gets plus 0.5 to or 5% increase in melee strength every time she loses 10% of her health. So she'd be the strongest character in melee strength, excluding Gojo in his domain, just making it more annoying to deal with. Also, because they're just fast, that's how that's going to work. I put Mechamaru at 20, but quite frankly, he'll be DLC, and I'll just put Kenjaku here. I didn't want to put Kenjaku in the game because I don't know. I just didn't really like putting him in the game, but yeah, Kenjaku's 20. Mechamaru could be DLC. Then the two main additional fictional characters are added here as the final two slots. And as far as DLC goes, now Kenjaku would become Mechamaru, but you have Geto, Arume, Takaba, Yuki, who I definitely see, Nobara, who I could also see being added to the main roster as like the 23rd slot because everyone loves Nobara. But Nobara sadly isn't there in Shibuya, and I personally like Nanami better. You can get Panda, Reggie Star. Reggie Star might be in the game because he might just team up with the Slumbering Sorcerer, so he could be like 23 or 24 as well. Ryu from the four-way clash fight with Yuta, Miguel, Naoya, but his curse form, Naobito, because he's like just the better version of Naoya, who's not a curse. Principal Yaga, you could also throw Principal Gakuganji in. Sukuna as Megami is definitely someone that if the game was something, I'd definitely want to throw him in as a DLC character. Noritoshi Kamo, the one that's everyone's age, not the Kenjaku variant. Miwa and Yorozu, because Yorozu has like the cool creation effects. And yeah, and overall, this game would, I feel like a good temporary name for it would be Jujutsu Kaisen, the Slumbering Sorcerer, or something along that line. So if you stayed for all this time, thank you. If you liked it or had any comments on how it could be improved, please let me know. It's just kind of fun thing I wanted to think about. And if you didn't, um, if you like this or actually want to talk to me about it, feel free to let me know in the comments section. And if you want me to do more stuff like this, like a potential game for Bleach or One Piece, then let me know as well. I'd be happy to do that. And thank you for your time, and have a good one. Like and subscribe.